Hello, Fringers. The following podcast may not be suitable for all ages. Listener discretion is advised. Look alive, sunshine. It's 2099, under a gold and crimson sky. A group of punks run the streets, just trying to stay alive. Boardwalks to boardrooms, back alleys and big bars. Trust your instincts. No one's who they say they are. Information's easy come and easy go. You best stay on your toes. Big Brother is watching. It's time to put on a show. Hello everyone and welcome back to Angel City Stories. My name is Sean, aka Mallo. I am the GM for this podcast. And joining me today is my co-creator and co-conspirator in this whole thing, Alex. And we're gonna be talking lore today.
Okay.
Yeah.
Go for it.
I mean, go for it, I guess. Yeah, sure. Yeah. This is a great untitled episode so far.
We're very good at this.
Very professional. We've done this many times, I think.
And by that he means very few.
I mean, you've been on a former podcast of mine for a little bit.
Yeah, I did a few episodes.
Yeah.
Mostly when you jumped into areas where you were like, oh, Alex knows a lot about this.
Looking at Lucasfilm properties.
Yeah.
So lore. We're going to talk about the lore of Identico today. And try to give everybody a little bit of a preview into what we created and why and how. Maybe a little bit of all of that.
Yes.
Yeah. Just so everybody, because we don't really set anything up before we do the 3 episodes. Before we start getting going on any of those episodes, we haven't really like set it up. We just sort of like assumed that people understood like what Identico was and what the world was, and the setting of Angel City, which is kind of where we started out the whole thing.
And now I feel the need to like grab one of our books. I'm looking around the studio right now for a copy of our book because I'm gonna tell you the secret, and it's not so much a secret anymore. But it's we don't remember what we wrote down.
I even said it yesterday. I was doing a live stream pitch of Identico, and somebody asked me about the reading the book or whatever. I was like, read enough of the book to where you don't have to stop me every 5 minutes to ask like, what do I do? Like, and understand that like you roll a d20. Like, hey, maybe we should talk about that. Like the mechanics of it a little bit too. It's like you roll a d20. You know. But like, don't memorize the book because the writers of this haven't memorized the book. There's no possible way. It's like 260 something pages.
Well, that, we wrote it over the course of 5 years, and so it took so long, and it was retooled and redone, and like I still have screenshots of text messages where we were workshopping what different governments look like.
Yes,
right,
and they're all saved in like nice little like Trello cards and Word docs that we're going to come back to at another time.
But seriously, we would workshop this over text message, like while like we had little kids, and so hard to talk on the phone.
Yep.
But then we would just screenshot it from our cell phones later, so we wouldn't forget what we had actually already decided upon. Because if we didn't, we might forget later.
Yes. Well, and so much of it is like, as I was trying to tell somebody the other day, it's like I can pretty much plop down and run a game for anybody at any time, anywhere with a hook.
Yes.
When we start to get into like the little bit of the more like granular rules of the thing, I'm either going to flub it because I'm definitely not the rules as written GM. Mm-hmm. I'm definitely much more the rule of cool out of the two of us, I think. Or 2, I'm gonna just come up with the thing on the fly and hope I remember what the house rule was that I wrote at the time. So it'll probably be close enough.
So with all the con games we've ran, right, and how many times we ran playtests at cons, the thing that I finally came to probably after about 6 to 9 months of it was just that I didn't really care what the rules were, okay, especially for a con game, right? Unless there was something specific I was trying to pull from it, I would just make it up.
Yeah, for a one-shot kind of like, we don't know if you're going to buy the book or not.
We don't know if you're going to buy the book or not. And here's the thing. Even if you do, here's a little secret. We know you're not going to remember every little detail of that con game.
Correct.
And so it doesn't matter.
Although, I guess we should say,
that's the thing.
Yeah. But I think we should say, after a while, we started getting people bringing their character sheets back from the con games, being like, hey, I just want to pick up and run with this character. And we go, and that was probably 2 or 3 beta tests ago.
Yes. And so we had actually a friend of ours, an old friend of mine from high school who we linked up with at a con that we did every year. We would do Norwest Con every year, and this was, of course, pre-Rona. And my buddy Josh was always at Norwest Con, and he played Identico the first year we ran it there.
Yes, he did.
And he brought the same character back for either 2 or 3 more successive conventions.
Yeah.
The exact same player character.
Yeah. But leveled up every time. Like
Yes.
he was going, like he'd spend a significant amount of time, like with the beta rules. He would be like, he would come in at the beginning of the convention, read what updated beta rules we had with us, work on his character, and then by the time he was ready to play that Saturday and Sunday, he had his character rolled out, ready to go.
Yeah. Fully leveled from whatever he had done the prior
Yeah, exactly.
year.
Being asked, like asking like what the reputation was going to be, like what the score was, the money, like everything. Like he was ready to fly.
I think besides Sean and I, Josh played the absolute most
Yeah.
of anybody in Identico. And I think he's the only person besides you and I running the games that played every single test mission that we wrote.
Yes. Yeah.
At least once.
At least one, including some of the ones that we didn't even, that we basically, like the test mission, like a couple of test missions that will eventually we'll flush out and put out there. But like one of the test missions was simply, there's a border crossing in Ireland. That was the whole premise of the one you told me we were running.
Well, so let me explain. Let me explain a little bit of that, and I'm sure Sean will edit this all to make it all be more.
No, this is going to be
later.
like just this is us, man. This is how we write.
So this is how this would work before conventions. What we would do is we would know a convention is coming up, and we would start jotting down notes of different stuff and things that we wanted to test or things we wanted to run. And then what would happen is about 2 weeks before the convention, I would sit down with Google Earth, right, and Visio.
Yeah.
And I would just start making maps.
Yep.
Because as long as I have a map in front of me or in front of the player characters, I can at least be like, you're right there, and put my finger on a spot on the map, and they would be like, okay, we're right there.
Yeah.
I want to take a left at the next intersection. Great.
Yeah.
Like that's the easiest way. So that's actually also my like GM prep tip for everybody when you're running a modern or a cyberpunk game, maps are your friend.
Yeah.
Right? If you have maps, you've got everything because you can make everything else up
on
the fly. The hardest thing to make up on the fly is how does a city lay out?
Right.
What does it look like?
Yeah, you don't
from
need
a
to have
perspective.
Well, and you don't need to have like a battle map of a forest.
Oh no
or something like that.
no.
Yeah, like that's like characters can kind of be like they're kind of like, oh, well, it's a building. And it's like, okay, well, how many stories is a building? You go, well, it's 5 stories. And it's like, that's all you have to remember.
Yeah.
It's on 5 stories. You're on the ground. Whatever you need is up top. And you can just kind of go for it. And it's like, there's going to be some stairs. There's probably an elevator.
And that's where note cards are your friend.
Yeah.
Because as you're making it up, you're just jotting down little notes on a note card so that you're being a little consistent.
Yeah.
But that's the key right there is just, again, maps. Maps is the only thing. So we would literally have like concepts written down on note cards and maps that we would have laminated so we could use them over and over again.
Because we were poor making this game.
We were. And and the other thing was like when you're running, like we would do PAX West, right?
Yeah.
And for 3 days, we would run 6 to 12 games a day.
Yeah.
Total. And that's just constant. And so
we did not get food. We thankfully had some fairies to bring us food and water.
Yes.
Otherwise we probably would have passed out.
We would have died. Anyway, so the lamination piece was like a $6 or $7 investment we would make on every little 11 by 17 map just so we could keep using it, because if we discovered, I think after our first or second con, where we brought paper.
Yeah.
We had paper character sheets and paper everything, and they got fucking destroyed.
Yep.
Or, and this isn't a bad thing, people would want to take them.
Yeah.
And they'd be like, can I keep my character sheet? I'm like, yeah, you can. Quick run to Kinko's.
Run to Kinko's around the corner.
Make 10 more copies of the Gutter Punk, because we ran out.
Yeah.
So we learned paper alone was just bad. And so even actually our pre-gens, we eventually ended up laminating all the pre-gens for cons.
Yeah.
So that people could use little, what do they call, whiteboard markers. Mm-hmm. And we could just erase them after every session. And we were ready to go in like 2 minutes. And so
we did actually still carry paper though, because there were those people that would come and play.
Yeah. But
and want to take it with them.
Those were almost special requests at that point though.
Yeah, no. But I mean, I think it was good to kind of have those kind of things going. Right.
Yeah.
And the thing about it is that those paper character sheets and the ones that we brought with us are actually the ones that are still in the book. You know, somebody was asking me yesterday.
Yes.
They were like, you know, because they were talking about a session 0, and he was telling me about this time where he brought like his whole family, and he was playing a medieval style game that we won't give a shout out to, but they're also based here in Seattle. And they went through the entire book, and the book is like 400. The core rule book's like 400 pages, so of course he didn't read the thing.
Okay.
Yeah, you know what I'm talking about now.
Which one are we talking about now? Okay, got it.
You know what I'm talking about. So it's huge. He didn't read the whole thing, but he got enough through like everybody making their characters. But that took him like 2 or 3 hours to make a character and pick all these things and stuff. And it's like, no, at the front of the rule book, like we want you just to be like pick a character and get ready to roll. Like you don't have to have a ton of things to get started in the game. And that was the whole con culture. That was just like every convention for us is like a performance half the time.
Well, and part of the big piece of the testing was we had these cheat sheets for the rules, which we need to publish at some point.
Yep.
We had a cheat sheet for the rules that we made that we would hand out to every one of the players who'd never played Identico, never touched it anymore. And our challenge was, can we teach you this role-playing game well enough for you to play it within 5 minutes?
Yeah.
Because we were usually, especially at the bigger cons like PAX, we had 2-hour time blocks, and that was it.
Yeah.
And anybody who's tried to be like, hey, here's a role-playing game you've never played before.
Mm-hmm.
Let me teach it to you and run an entire complete mission in 2 hours.
Yeah.
That really gets dicey.
Yep.
Really, really fast. And so that was, we had to learn to teach the game from the character sheet, from the cheat sheet very quickly, well enough for somebody to go, got it, I can play this now.
And it's interesting too, because like we get asked all the time, they're like, well, what's different about your game than say, Shadowrun or Cyberpunk Red or whatever. And it's like, it was built from the ability of very quickly playtesting. It was built from the, everybody only has so much time in their life, and we're going to bring it together and go for it.
And it was, can we teach you this game?
Yeah.
Super, super fast. And we were doing a Q&A the other day, and somebody said, what's the thing you guys regret most about it? Or what's the thing you like least about Identico? Mm-hmm. And the thing that we said was, we really hated the fact that as we went through development, the game actually was a little bit more crunchy than it is now in its published state. And there was some mechanics that we had in the game that we both really loved.
Yep.
Right. And that actually survived for a long time. Like our skill tree system, which took us like 1.5 years to design.
Yeah.
Right. It survived like 3.5 years into the development process before we finally said we pulled it out. And so there's some stuff that we pulled out of the game because of that crunch, because of the fact that we wanted you to be able to learn it fast, because we needed people to kind of buy in that way, because we didn't want to be Shadowrun. We didn't want to be the other ones that we pulled out that I actually still really miss.
Yeah. Well, we can always do advanced stuff.
We can.
It actually won't break the game, ironically enough, to do it that way.
Not yet.
Not yet. We'll break the game eventually. All right, so let's talk about the sort of lore and the background of the game. So when we open up in Identico, it's the year 2099. We have kind of remade America in a lot of ways, the world, as you like to say, capitalism won.
Yep.
So to speak. So capitalism sort of rules just about everything that goes on in society in some capacity. And it goes through something called the CHIP, which is the
Centralized Human Identity Program.
Yep, there we go. It's sort of your digital passport, where it keeps literally everything, and it keeps all this metadata about you, including all your transactions, where you've been, missing persons kinds of things and stuff like that are almost a thing of the future or a thing of the past. But it's not quite Minority Report yet, because they're not using it predictive analytics.
So
in some ways, maybe, but
not openly.
Right. Yeah.
So maybe we should start at the beginning of the beginning.
Okay.
So one of the things that we've discovered is unfortunately, we were a little prescient about this. Kind of the way that we get, the way that we wrote this is how do you get
right
to 2099? And so the first thing you have to understand is that going from the present day in real life, basically everything continues to get worse. Okay.
In some ways, yeah.
Everybody's like, 2020 is horrible. Okay. And we're like, yeah, 2020 is bad.
Wait till you get to 2031.
Okay. It's going to be even worse. And so and that's the way that capitalism does win, right?
Right.
Is that in the end, in their grab for power, they are the only ones left who are like, if we just put them under our control and everything's in the crapper right now, so we're just going to give them that minimum, that little bit that they need, that they want, to keep the populace mollified, and we're just going to take over everything.
Right. Yeah, no, we've often said a lot of times of like, if you're looking at the hierarchy of needs, right? Like the corporations will figure out how to keep you fed, keep you secure, keep you entertained, and everything else that you would kind of do, they can provide for you. I mean, they're already trying to provide for that now. And so when you start to get into those kinds of things, it only takes a couple of steps further to kind of figure out how they finish sort of taking over, right? Not in a way that like, not in a way that kind of like works against us or whatever, you know, like in such a way that like people just kind of like welcome TikTok in their life. And it's like, oh yeah, by the way, they're all just kind of secretly giving all your information to a government entity across over the seas or whatever like that. Supposedly. Allegedly. But you know, people are more than happy to give that to you and make raps about Carol Baskins and shit like that. Like,
yes. Well, and you can apply the same thing again, TikTok, Facebook, Twitter, every cookie you do, every website you visit, you know, I mean, how many times have I heard somebody be like, I was talking to my friend and I had my cell phone in my pocket and then I went to Google and then all of a sudden there were ads for the thing that I was just talking about with my friend.
Right.
You know, that stuff, that kind of predictive analytics basically goes into overdrive.
Yep.
And you're trading on your identity and data, and that data about who you are and what you're going to do next is the most valuable commodity on the planet.
Yep.
Because if you know what's going to happen before it happens, it's like the ultimate insider trading.
Yeah. You
can buy the stock, you can move the commodities, you can do whatever you want if you already know how the stuff's going to move.
So let's kind of do, so all of that is sort of the layer of like, how do we get to 2099 where all of this kind of metadata and your identity and things like that become even sort of like, we've taken the preciousness of current and like blown it up to like 100 times kind of what it is. But like the way that the world has been reshaped by that though is that like now corporations run very large portions of the world. I'm not going to say every government, because we definitely have written in certain governments still, but the governments even act like corporations at that point. But they certainly do that in America, which is where we kind of find the podcast and the team at in 2099, right? The government has, through basically a terrorist attack, kind of fallen apart, and the corporations were there to kind of pick up the pieces. And so, of course, everybody kind of showed loyalty to the corpse at that point.
Right. So basically kind of, you know, content warning to kind of, you know, what's going on right now. Take all of the aid that's needed for coronavirus, for everything else that's going on right now, and magnify that need by 10.
Yeah.
And then what you turn around and do is the government is even more hapless than they are right now. So just to give you an idea, we're recording this August 9th of 2020.
If you can believe that.
Okay. And so if you've been following the news lately, you know how hapless our government is. So basically what ends up happening is these corporations go, we give up. We're not dealing with you anymore, federal government. And that also means that they're not listening to them anymore. So as this massive internal refugee crisis is happening, as people are fleeing the center of the country because it's literally just been nuked.
Yeah.
Right. And not only does our government not know who did it,
right,
so they don't know who to retaliate against, they don't know who to attack, they don't know who to fight, and everybody else on the planet is going, wasn't us. You know, they're also fumbling the part where they have to help their citizenry.
Right.
And what the corporations have that they don't is logistics networks. Mm-hmm. They've got data. They've got warehouses. They've got jobs. They've got places for people to stay. And so they literally go, we're going to spend the $1 trillion split out amongst all these corporations to take these people. And now, government, you don't get to say anything anymore.
Right.
They're our people now. We own them.
Yeah. They literally have no power to fight back on all of that.
Right. And so when that happens, the federal government in America essentially just acquiesces. Right. They go, fine, we give up. We're done. Right. So they sell off all the major utilities. They sell off all critical government functions essentially to the corporations. They go, and the corporations basically just divide them up amongst each other and say, all right, you're going to do this, I'm going to do this, and we're all going to just do whatever the hell we want.
Right.
And what ends up happening is what we term in the book as the reorganization. And so essentially everything becomes a series of city-states. There are now 25 city-states that exist within what used to be the United States, right? The states as they were no longer exist.
Yep.
And each city-state has its council, which is made up of the largest corporations in that city, in that metroplex, right? And they appoint 2 senators to go to the central government because corporations can't exist unless it's in relation to some sort of entity to say you're a company or not. So they still need someone to adjudicate and to be in contrast of, or it's anarchy and that doesn't really work. So sorry, libertarians, it doesn't work that way. Okay. Anyway, so they are still controlling that central government in spite of the fact that central government is pseudo-independent.
Pseudo. I mean, you can imagine the only people that are going to lose in that government are the little people who aren't corporations.
Right.
Like, they're going to find ways to continue to entrench their like agendas and things like that. And the sort of common person is not going to be represented there at all.
And what the corporations know after this point and where they try and get to is this. The common metric that's used for revolutions is this. You need 2 to 4% of the population in the streets. 2 to 4%. That's the magic number because that tells you that roughly 40 to 60% of the population is sympathetic to your cause and will help you, hide you, feed you, arm you, do all that other stuff. What the corporation's entire modus operandi is to keep that magic number under that 4%. Right. So they're going to provide as much of the population with jobs, food, housing, entertainment, clothing, all the things that they need. So they're going to pay you to work for the corporation, and then you're going to go shop at a corporate-owned store. That's going to turn around and take that money back from you, and it just turns into this one big cycle. But most of the population is fine with it because, again, they're fed, housed, clothed, and are entertained.
And it might not be the same corp-owned store. So it's like if you work for a tech firm like an Amazon or a Walmart or something like that, like one of these kind of retail outlets, like if you work for them, like, yeah, you might go and then spend some of the money there, but you might also go spend some money at another corporation owned thing, you know, like a different type of grocery store or something like that, right? Like the money kind of moves around between these entities, but mostly it's provided by one corp. They've all kind of expanded, the bigger ones at least, have all expanded to kind of do some basic needs for everybody.
So they own all the property, they own everything, and they just cycle it through.
Yep.
But they know that in order for them to hold on to the power that they want, that's the best way for them to do it. And that's where you start in Identico. Is you start in, especially if you're going to be setting your game in North America, you start in a world where these corporations run
pretty much everything. Yeah.
Okay.
It's like a 19th century mining town kind of thing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Very much so. And that's where a lot of our inspiration came from, with the mining and logging towns, which actually there's a bunch of those in the Seattle area. If you know this, like the Seattle area, the Bellevue was a logging town, and it was owned by that. And they had corporate stores, and you were given scrip instead of money.
Right.
And the same concept can be used today.
Yep.
So.
Or in 2099.
Or in 2099.
Because it's pretty much that's where we're headed right now. So. Let's talk a little bit about so the way that the city-states have been organized, right? They're huge. I mean, if you've seen things like Blade Runner or like Akira, Ghost in the Shell, you know, very large cities.
Visually, that's what they appear to be.
Yeah, visually large cities.
Exceedingly dense.
The population continues to grow despite the scar. Which we'll talk about the scar in a minute, because we talked about like how America kind of came to do its thing, but we didn't talk about like what the scar is. But like inside the cities, it's very dense. It's very multi-level, you know, very multiplexed kind of piece. You know, where there is in a lot of times in most cities, there's kind of this like second layer. It's almost like you remember like Final Fantasy VII, like everything above a certain level,
above the plate, and then
below the plate, and below the plate.
Yeah,
it's kind of like that in a lot of these cities. Maybe there's not necessarily quite the same. Like
it's not necessarily as clear of a line,
right.
And it may be a lateral line where it's like the outskirts of the city are like this, and the closer you get to the center, it's richer. Again, geography and
Yeah.
different things like that kind of control that.
Yep. It's dependent upon the cities too, which we describe in the book. But
Yeah.
where this particular game takes place is called Angel City,
Which is what used to be basically all of Los Angeles, Los Angeles County, Orange County, and San Diego County, and then part of the Inland Empire.
Yep.
For my Southern California people. Okay, basically out to about San Bernardino, right? And actually anybody who's just Googling around and trying to figure out where it is,
Yeah.
San Bernardino is kind of the eastern edge of Angel City, and then of course out to the water.
Getting towards the desert and the mountains out that side.
But just that consistent city where if there wasn't a sign, you wouldn't know you were leaving one city and entering another one.
Yeah.
Right?
But we don't really mark up the cities that way.
No.
It's just one giant city.
And so they might be in districts, they might be in zones, they might be demarcated however that city decides to do so, however that metro decides they want to do that, but
Yeah.
that's kind of additional flavor.
Yeah. The players in this particular one are what we call fringers. And so they are not really, connected to corps at all. They are, sort of running on their own. They are, at least in Angel City, they're living quite literally on the fringe of society, right? They're in outskirts near the main gates and all like that of these cities, rather than sort of trying to blend in with the little bit more polished kind of corp life and stuff like that.
And some people that's by choice, and some people it's because they don't. The corps have basically abandoned them, and you're not giving them a choice.
Yep.
Because if you don't basically play by their rules, they're just going to excise you.
You're a commodity. That's the whole idea behind Identico is your identity is a commodity. That means you as a physical person is a commodity. And the corporation might get rid of you, but might actually keep your identity for other people. That's happened before. And so that's a little bit of where this kind of takes place. The thing we love about Angel City is so much of there's a very clear delineation between the more polluted parts of the city and then how much it gets clean towards the beaches and all, and Malibu and all those it still retains a lot of its Hollywood kind of lifestyle to it. So
look, the rich people still want their beachfront access.
They absolutely do.
Okay, they're not giving that up.
So let's talk a little bit about in the first episode, we meet some of the characters, and Titus, your character, actually comes from the Wastes.
Yes.
And the Wastes are, and we'll get into it in a different episode. We'll get into about your character, but the Scar plays heavily into the Wastes, and what we consider the Wastes is anything outside of these giant cities. And the Wastes is a moniker that's given by most of the corporations in the city folk.
Yep.
To kind of downplay.
It's a pejorative.
Yeah, it's a pejorative for anybody that lives outside of the gates. I mean, these massive walls and things like that.
Yep.
In reality, it's actually not quite as bad, except for the Scar. It's not quite as bad.
Itself.
It's a lot of people who choose to not want to live under corp rule. They want to live free, don't tread on me, all of that kind of thing when it comes to...
That's where those people went.
Yeah. As we wrote in the book, it's the people who were always yelling the "I told you so" signs
the end is near. And
Yeah.
they're like, I told you.
Some doomsday preppers and things like that definitely mixed in.
Yeah.
But it's it's a little bit of Mad Max meets Fallout, but the good Fallouts, not the bad ones. Where it's a little bit of kind of...
Yeah, I mean, probably not as... I would be hesitant to say it's that all of the places out there are as wrecked, right? Because there are some very reasonably sized, small towns out there that just don't play. They're off on their own. They're doing what they want to do. They don't want to be part of the system, and so they choose to build their own system. The upside of that is they don't have that oppressive surveillance state that the corporations have wrought upon the cities. The downside is they don't have access to a lot of the things that the cities do. If you are of roughly middle class or higher in the city, you're going to have access to clean water and sewage and all this stuff all of the time, right? Whereas if... the one I would probably liken it to now that I'm thinking about it is Far Cry 5.
Yeah.
Right? They've got that small, rural, insular feel to them, and they've got their own jail and they've got their own sewage plant. But the downside is when the sewage plant goes down, there's no corporation or nobody there to help them.
Yeah. They have to come together as a group to really kind of fix all these things.
Right. And some of them are good and some of them are not so nice.
There's definitely some bandits out there.
Well, and there's whole like things. In fact, if you go read the first set of short story books we wrote, our friend Matt, the story that one part of the story that he wrote was about a guy from a religious fundamentalist group.
Speaking of Far Cry 5.
Speaking of Far Cry 5, okay, who has a community out in the wastes, right? They're called the Sons of Joshua, but they have some severe hang-ups about modern technology and more specifically cybernetics.
Yep.
And so one of the stories that he wrote for this was about a guy who bombs a cybernetic hospital right near the Texas demilitarized zone. Yeah, by the way, we got rid of Texas, just so you guys know.
Yeah,
Texas is its own country now.
Texas is its own country. We consulted with many Texans. They were okay with it.
Yeah, they were also okay in that Texas is basically one step shy of a theocracy.
They were also oddly okay with that and kind of were like, yeah, that's pretty much what would happen if they seceded right now.
So just, in Identico, Texas has actually been under UN embargo for like 25 years at this point. Like nobody likes them.
For many reasons.
Okay. They've been at war with Mexico for no particular reason for about 30 years.
For part of America for no reason too.
Yeah. So, the Texans are a little...
Yeah.
They're Texan.
They're Texans.
Yep.
But, but it's interesting too is because like the one other thing that the government for America actually does is the marshals. Those are still around.
Yes.
So you're multi-state sort of, there's no FBI, there's no CIA, there's no NSA kind of thing.
So
but
on paper, right. So first off, all of those, there's definitely some argument to be made that all of those agencies are essentially unconstitutional. So we'll throw that out to the side. That being said, on paper, the American central government still claims all of the territory from sea to shining sea, except for Texas, as their territory. Now, their control over it is nominal at best outside of the metros. And so what the marshals do is they patrol all of the areas outside of the metros, and they enter the metros with corp approval to do certain law enforcement actions, and I'm using air quotes there. So that's their job. And so my character, as we start, used to be a marshal and is no longer a marshal, and you'll find out more why later. But he used to be one of those guys.
Yep. And so that's kind of the things of like, you come up with one thing that'll come up in the first couple of episodes of the podcast is a place called Danaska. So this kind of gets you to the other side of the things in the waste. Is Danaska is actually at the edge of the scar, but it's built into the side of a mountain in Wyoming, which is a nuclear facility that the government used to run. Like the Air Force has a base out there. And there's an actual like nuclear bunker out there. And so we basically took that and opened up the entire mountain range and made that into one giant community that is actually fairly technologically advanced.
They are.
For the waste. Yes. But that's more few and far between to kind of give you these very anti-corporate bases almost. Like they have a huge trade center. They have a huge hydroponic farms and things like that. They're a very containing society. When it comes to it. But, the trade-off is you got to go to the middle of nowhere in Wyoming next to the scar, and you got to get up a mountain and everything like that. Like, there's a lot of, like, drawbacks to it, but for those people that are trying to kind of, like, find refuge out there, there's definitely some points.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. It's also Fort Danworth? Is that the one up in the...
that's northeast,
Northeast, yep. And then there's also tribal lands.
Yep.
Where they consolidated... Two versions of it. One was destroyed by Texas in Cheyenne, and then there's a new one that is up north where they sort of migrated from there.
Where I think Montana is.
Where right Montana now. Is. They basically took most of Montana as their own place.
Yep.
And they defend it pretty harshly for obvious reasons because Texas went and did a Texas.
Yep.
So that's kind of where the world politics, and then there's a ton of other things that come along with, like we've talked about Britain, we've talked about Japan, we've talked about Hong Kong, we've talked about the UN is now in Kenya.
Have we talked enough about Hong Kong? So
No, we haven't talked about Hong Kong a lot in press. At least.
That all boils down to the UN thing. So the UN moved their headquarters out of the United States and said, "Screw you guys, we're taking our ball, we're leaving," and they actually moved it to Kenya.
Yeah.
So the headquarters for the UN, and actually if you look in the book, there's a really great art piece in there of the UN headquarters in Mombasa, right? And Hong Kong is now one of 2 or 3 UN protectorates.
Yep.
Basically, because it was such a critical financial market, because the Chinese central government was playing such havoc there, the UN went in and went, no, we're not letting anybody have this,
right?
Because we don't want to collapse the world economy. So we're just going to take this and everybody play nice, or we're going to be mean. So it is a UN protectorate now, and no longer part of the mainland China government.
And I think we should probably underscore, when we say it's UN protectorate, the UN is not quite the they're not the Peace Corps that they are now. The UN, for the UN to get involved in anything is scary.
Yeah,
because the UN runs the CHIP program,
and they also run like their own private paramilitary and intelligence agency. That
rivals, or what we think actually dwarfs most corporation
ability to do stuff.
Yeah.
Yep.
They're pretty scary people.
And so their first big major action after Hong Kong was what we call the Node War in the book, and it was in the 2040s. And basically the world's largest ISP, decides to thumb their nose at everybody, and they start shutting down most of the internet because they run their largest ISP.
Literal ransom.
Right. And so the American government kind of puts them under siege, and eventually the UN goes, nope, we can't have this because, the economy and a lot of other things start collapsing, logistics networks, and we become so dependent upon the internet as a concept that they literally send in their paramilitary and intelligence organization and arrest the entire board of directors and
basically point their finger at them and go, stop it.
Yeah. And so basically after that, it causes multiple countries as well as the United Nations to create net control bureaus. And the internet is now basically a utility.
That's not basically. It is a basic human right.
Yes.
We went that far to say it.
Yeah. They can't. Nobody can have that level of control over the internet because it's too dangerous. Yep. And so the UN and their agency, the Information and Observations Group, they just don't allow it.
Right.
And so basically they let the corpse be until the corpse get a little too big for their britches.
Yep.
And then they go in there and, spray them with water like a cat. No, bad.
Well, it's funny too because it's almost like a nesting doll kind of situation, right? Where it's like, you've got like the waste kind of places, then you've got the city states, then you've got the corporations themselves, then you've got the IOG, right? And it's just that like one fish, two fish, bigger fish kind of thing every time that kind of goes through of like there's always somebody bigger, badder out there.
Yep.
To kind of play with or play against in a lot of ways. So yeah, what else have we not covered? We talked about, the SCAR. Well, let's talk about the SCAR real quick.
Yeah.
Because the SCAR will play a factor into the beginnings of this stuff. And so the SCAR basically goes from right around, South Dakota down to like the top of Texas. And it is a line where they literally, and we say they because we just, like in the book, you just don't know. But they basically
drop 25 nukes on it.
Yeah. And we did the math to figure out how long it would take and everything like that.
That probably got us on a watch list.
Probably. But it drew a scar literally across the breadbasket of the United States. And that's what kind of kicked off all of this reformation and reorganization and things that we talk about in the book and how America has kind of come to become what it is today. The problem is it is ungoverned. It is unusable. The ground is still soaked with radiation, so you have to have special plating and things like that to kind of get through this whole thing. But if you want to ship food or use anything, you have to either go to the top of the SCAR, which is disputed land really between Canada and several other groups, or you got to go through Texas below. And let's be honest, you probably don't want to go through Texas.
No, and it's North Dakota to the Texas border.
North Dakota to the Texas border, you're right. Yeah. Yes.
And so it bifurcates.
Yeah.
North America.
The North America, yeah. Or America at this point. So the only other option at that point is to go right down the middle.
And so the marshals and the central government maintain trade routes. They maintain trade, like basically highways that are patrolled by the marshals and by military forces so that goods can get through.
Yep.
But that's about it.
Yeah. And that's it. And that's
and
only
most of those
for the
trucks are armored.
They're armored, or they're armored, and they have their own group that goes with them, which is one of the things that like a lot of mercenaries and fringers will do is they'll just escort. They'll run escort missions. And that's a good way to make some money. If you're going, even if you work for a corp, that's a good way to make some money is to run escort missions for them.
Because it's still the cheapest way to get goods across the continent.
Yep. Yeah. It's still expensive to fly a plane from one part of the country to another.
Yeah.
It just is.
Yep. See?
Smack my shit.
There you go.
What else have we talked about lore wise? Let's talk a little bit about like day-to-day life in Angel City, or in Angel City is part of the entire world, right? Because for most folks that are on the fringe, and even those folks that work for the corps, so the wage slaves that are kind of working that way, right? Like you get up, you go to work, it's all sort of public transport most of the time. You don't really have a car.
Nope.
There are cars, but most of the cities are walkable with some sort of public transportation.
Right, and a car almost has become more of a luxury / status item.
Yeah.
Because traffic, obviously, anybody who's ever been to LA, I mean,
yeah, it's terrible.
It became untenable. And so, yes, public transportation is much, much better, but cars are much more of a status symbol.
Definitely. Well, and then, fringers will still have, they've got their cars and things like that to get from point A to point B, because they're usually for hire.
Yeah.
They're usually their own kind of things. They can't get a job with a corp for whatever reason.
When you start bringing, when you're armed to the teeth and in body armor and wander onto the subway, like people tend to get a little nervous. Like, what are you doing here, dude? Like, relax, Mr. Vibro Katana carrying weirdo.
That's when the cameras start rolling.
Exactly.
A lot.
And so that's the biggest thing that you need to know about any metroplex, and especially Angel City, is it is a giant surveillance state.
Yep.
I mean, and when you come down to it, the fact of the matter is every ATM has a camera. Every doorway has a camera,
yep.
Right? And think of the expansion of things like Ring doorbells and Amazon cameras,
yep.
And all this stuff, these blinks and ATM cameras, and think of everywhere. Now imagine the fact that those are all now networked together to a greater or lesser degree. You don't have analog cameras anymore. They don't exist. It's all IP based.
Right.
And so, corp security or law enforcement can now track you camera to camera to camera to camera to camera, and basically there's almost nowhere you're not under surveillance. And then when you add that to the fact that they have the ability through algorithms to search through people's social media feeds, and that guy taking a selfie that caught you in the background at 3:25 p.m., they can now isolate you, know? And so you have to realize that ubiquity of cameras and surveillance that we have now is exponentially more.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, the thing that a lot of games don't do as much of, and the thing that we always want to kind of hammer home is you're never not on camera.
Cover your tracks is what we're trying to tell you. If you're going to do something illicit, make sure you're covering your tracks.
You better be looping that camera feed.
Yep. Which is a pretty common thing for hacking in the game, is to loop camera feeds all the time. Yes. As the first alpha playtest learned very much the hard way.
Yes.
They were by the way, they were very experienced players, and they forgot to cover the tracks. And so the beginning of the second mission of the alpha playtest, they woke up the next morning to realize that like an international, basically the IOG,
had a red notice out on them and was
hunting for them
across Europe. They're like, oh, great.
I would also say too is like this podcast is called Angel City Stories and stuff like that, but like the world of Identico, it's very easy to move from one part of the world to the other. Like it's like world travel is not necessarily frowned upon.
No, and it's not difficult now as long as you have a chip.
Yeah.
That's the thing.
Or you can fake a chip.
Yes, but that's a whole other thing. Other thing. If you have a chip, you can grab a low Earth orbit craft and be from Angel City to Dubai in 3 hours.
Yep.
Because it'll just boop, and you're on the other side of the planet. No problem. If you have a chip.
Right.
Now, that being said, for GMs and for players, definitely encourage you guys. This is a global community.
Yeah.
It should be a global community as time goes forward and technology increases and their ability to travel and communicate. Hong Kong is just next door now.
Right.
The world is getting smaller for a reason.
Yeah.
And you should feel free to not go, I'm stuck in this one metroplex or this one area. We've taken player character groups from everywhere from Dubai to Singapore to Northern Ireland to Rome. I'm trying to think where else. Stockholm.
Eventually to South Africa.
Eventually to South Africa. That's coming.
Yep.
Vancouver.
Yeah.
Angel City. I mean, it should feel global.
Yeah.
And so don't be afraid to send them globetrotting.
Yeah. It's actually kind of fun to go globetrotting too. In a larger kind of thing, is you get different settings, you get different styles, you get different like places.
Well, and it adds a nice layer of complication for the player characters.
Yeah.
Stuff that they have to be able to think about. Okay, if you go to Singapore or Thailand, who speaks the language?
Or at least has a translator on them.
Yeah, I mean,
well enough.
And remember, run everything through Google Translate. See how well that comes out.
Oh yeah, it's gonna be the most broken everything.
That, and it can make for some funny stuff.
Yeah, we don't call it Google Translate in our world, but your Glow can do that for you. But guess what?
It's not perfect.
It's not perfect.
Okay.
Yeah. The other one that I love about globetrotting though, and is how the hell do you get your ROV there? So ROVs is robotically operated vehicles. They are essentially what one player character can control this humanoid robot with their mind. And the robot's usually much bigger, much stronger, much faster than a human ever could be, with much bigger guns. I mean, they're kind of the heavy. I mean, they're quite literally sometimes a walking tank. So how do you can't really walk that down the street. So then you got to figure out how to get that half across the world too, which is always kind of a fun logistical, but it's almost like a side quest in some ways.
When they were trying to smuggle stuff into Belfast.
Yeah.
In that one mission, there was one we ran where they were trying to smuggle arms and one of the player characters' ROVs into Northern Ireland, and they were having a heck of a time with it.
Yep.
They were like, well, we could go overland, but that's walled and there are checkpoints. We could send it in on a submarine into the busy port.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it does make for some fun logistical challenges, right? Yeah. Some people just literally drop them from the sky.
That's usually where I get a chance to do that though. That's a me flavor GM thing.
Yep.
It costs a lot of money to do that though.
It does.
All right, I think that's it for the lore for right now, right? I think it was pretty good.
I think we're pretty good.
Yeah. All right, so we will be back next week. We're going to start with our player characters. We're actually going to start with Titus and introduce you guys to some of the players that are going to be in the game and a little bit more about their backgrounds. And so you will know more about the players, about each other, than they will by the time the podcast kind of kicks in. So if you want to learn more about the book and you've intrigued by the rambling that we have done today, go to www.playidentico.com. Pick up a copy of the book. If you pick up the hardcover copy, we will sign it before we send it off to you, and we'll make sure it's wiped down and things like that too. We don't want to spread germs around the world.
Yep.
We also have pins. We have shirts. We'll have stickers up in our merch store there
very soon.
Most of that's already up there, but by the time you hear this, everything will probably be up there. And if you want to get any of our other kind of products, go to DriveThruRPG and search Identico. It's IDENTECO. A lot of people put I in there. That's not quite how it works, but go search that. Our first mission called City of Glass, which starts in Vancouver, is part of a 3-part mission that's going to introduce some really crazy things into the game in the future. So go give that a look. If you could, drop us a like and a review on your favorite podcasting app. That way other folks can find us and learn about Identico in the world. Any last things to say?
Have fun.
Yes, have fun. Rule of cool always outweighs rules as written. We'll see you guys next week.